Hi, and welcome to Module 6. This week, you will learn about ethics, equity, and algorithmic bias. I'm Shamya Karumbaiah, an assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. In this lecture, we will focus on algorithmic bias. This lecture is meant to give you a practical and what I call a critical introduction to the complex issue of bias. It is very likely that when you finish this week, you will have more open questions than answers, and that's okay. In what ways do ignoring learner context introduce harmful biases in adaptive learning systems? This will be a guiding question for us all of this week. Let's take the example of detecting students' emotions using their facial expression data. Ignoring gender and racial context of students in this example is likely to introduce harmful biases against female students of color due to the poor performance of facial recognition on females with darker skin tones. This is also true for other forms of data. There have been reports of encoding bias against linguistic and ethnic groups in automated essay scoring, and in marking African American English as toxic by hate speech detectors. I want you to pause here and write down an example or two for the use of predictive models in your context. It would be great if it is from education. Along with that, could you also share the student populations it is expected to serve? Just give me your best guess, and you can define population however you like. Please write these down in your computer so you can post in the discussion board. All right. Okay. So keep these examples in your mind and we will revisit it again throughout this tutorial. Now let's talk more about what bias is. Adaptive systems in education incorporate different kinds of algorithmic decision making. This is where a computer-driven algorithm makes different decisions for different individuals. And these algorithms could be data-driven or rule-based, explainable or inscrutable, descriptive or predictive. As these tools continue to be used by diverse student populations across the globe, they need to ensure that their pedagogical decisions meet the needs of all students for an equitable outcome. The popular view of data-driven decision-making as fair and objective is contradicted by recent research, both in education and more broadly in domains like criminal justice and medicine, that highlights how adaptive systems encode societal biases leading to discriminatory behaviors towards specific student subpopulations. Yet, despite the recent spike in the research on algorithmic bias, there is no consensus on a single definition of bias. Some researchers also use alternate terms such as unfairness, discrimination, or demographic disparity. The reading this week by Baker and Horn offers a synthesis of bias definitions. Most researchers tend to investigate bias at the subgroup level, wherein they investigate bias against specific student subpopulations. It is relatively less popular to view bias from an individual point of view. A small subset of researchers have investigated ways to attain individual fairness, wherein they see if people who are similar with respect to the prediction task receive similar outcomes. My stance usually tends to be more aligned with the group definitions of bias. And for the purposes of our discussion today, Let's define biases as the possible sources of downstream harm that can lead to societally unfavorable outcomes in specific student subpopulations. Downstream harm in the case of learning analytics tools and systems refers specifically to inequitable student outcomes, not just restricted to learning outcomes, but also in the experiences more broadly. This could include engagement, motivation, self-identity, and affect of students. We can examine the consequences of bias through the lens of allocative and representational harm. Allocative harms result from the withholding of learning opportunities or other resources from specific student groups. For instance, bias in standardized testing could lead to denied college admissions. On the other hand, representational harm refers to discriminatory depictions of certain subgroups. For instance, African American English is sometimes tagged as hate speech in discussion forum posts. Let me illustrate why bias is a serious problem by looking at adaptive and AI-based learning systems. The general goal of these systems is to optimize student learning with one-to-one instruction and immediate feedback, which is often hard to achieve in traditional schooling. These systems attempt to identify key moments in students' learning to adapt based on perceived student needs. Such automated decision-making often involves little to no human intervention. Adaptive learning systems are being increasingly adopted in education, including formal public education. Several forms of adaptive systems exist today, from fully online to blended learning environments, from learning games to open-ended learning systems, and from sketching-based to dialogue-based tutors. They have been designed for diverse subject matters and built on several platforms, including virtual reality and wearable technology. These systems incorporate different kinds of algorithmic decision-making, wherein computer-driven algorithms make different decisions for different individuals. Studying bias in adaptive learning systems is important because they make real-time decisions that impact students' learning and experiences closely. But it is a particularly challenging task as these systems often involve models of complex educational constructs, such as behavior, affect, and motivation. And this often utilizes rich student data, such as fine-grained student interaction data. These complexities may likely introduce complex biases, which may need a more nuanced approach to identify and mitigate. And despite the wide usage of these systems, biases in these systems have not yet been thoroughly examined. Let's take the example of a system called LearnTA. And LearnTA uses algorithmic model of student knowledge to predict a student's current skill level and decide the difficulty level of the content that they will see next. If the knowledge estimation model were to be biased against female students, it may systematically deliver content below the student's skill level, leading to missed learning opportunities and suboptimal experience, and could potentially lower achievement and engagement in female students in the long run. Moreover, this could also become a self-fulfilling prophecy. This could happen when the incorrect prediction for female students may lead to actual low performance, further confirming the system's bias, thus perpetuating the system's behavior. In this fashion, adaptive systems have the potential to obscure the root cause of the bias and automate its effect, making it harder to objectively identify and fix it. In addition, these systems often serve a diverse student population, with a single system catering to students from different grade levels, countries, and socioeconomic and cultural backgrounds. This further complicates the issue of bias, as system behavior now needs to be non-discriminatory across all student subpopulations it serves. All right, let's pause here and revisit the example of the predictive model that you chose earlier. Now, could you think of potential harms this model could cause to student populations that you identified if it were to be biased against them? Again, could you write these down in your computer so that you can post these in the discussion board?